You're listening to Trysteropod episode 20, podcast with composers David Kulma, that's me, and Dorian Wallace, the other guy.
Yep.
And we are composers who talk about politics and music and whatever Dorian wants to talk about. So, how's it going today, Dorian?
Hey, it's going well. Yeah, so today we're going to be speaking with really cool artist and activist Julio. And Jay runs a really incredible group called Sound Off Music for Bail. And so yeah, Jay, thanks for coming on, and fill us in with some of the details. What is Sound Off Music for Bail, and what do you do?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dorian and David, for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be spending this morning with you. As you guys mentioned, I'm Julio, and I run Sound Off Music for Bail. We're an organization, a collective, if you will, of musicians, of educators, of listeners who work to combine classical music, Western classical music, with organizing and information around the U.S. prison industrial complex. So we've got concerts and workshops. We raise money directly for bail funds that way. We also have internal education campaigns, our open mics and reading sessions that really fill classical music practitioners in on some of the work that's being done outside of that community. Really, I think helps drive home the idea of intersection between our cultural work and the work that's needed in the space of abolitionist organizing.
Yeah, it's you had two events that I've now seen, just because we're in this motherfucking COVID landscape, and so I've gotten to see some of your events, the online things, and the first was you were doing a really worthwhile project for IMSLP, and then the second was the concert, the group muse that I saw the other day. So yeah, like what I guess what were those all about?
So the first one that you're talking about was the second of our Engrave-a-thons, which is a name that I will take full shame for. And we assembled a bunch of pieces by composers of historically marginalized identities, all findable on IMSLP, who for one reason or another just didn't have good editions on IMSLP. If you look on like a Beethoven or Mozart piece, no matter what, you'll find like 7 editions, and like 5 of them will be crappy, and then 2 of them will be like ripped from Henley or Barenreiter. They'll be really nice editions. And as a kid, when I was just starting on violin, I was like 11 or 12, like IMSLP was a godsend. We weren't spending any money on sheet music.
Oh yeah.
We didn't have any money for that. And so what I played was pretty much controlled by what was available on IMSLP, and we're hoping that by compiling, first of all, we made that list. Then we spent, a few hours coming together and just turning those first editions with like missing notes or like even some manuscripts that we found into beautiful looking new editions. Typeset on the Finale or Sibelius or Dorico or Note Flight. I promise I'm not getting like commission from any of these, but it's so easy nowadays to make your own edition, and I think it's really important that if you've got the time to do this work, that you do, because major publishers are overall not going at it, and some smaller publishers are. A lot of them are, of course, primarily white institutions, or they're literally just white owned. Like they're just this one white guy who's like, oh, I'm gonna like make a new edition of like George Boulogne, of Boulogne St. George's, and maybe make a little profit on it. These pieces have been out for like 350 years, so I get the drive to do that, but I also think it's really important that for kid growing up like me, maybe not in New York, but like in Montana, or maybe in New York, who might not have access to the ability to like throw down $30 for an edition of a score, that they have the ability to, and that they're not just limited, of course, to the works of Mozart, but you know, the world is available to them.
Great.
And I guess we should talk about the concert. Hope I'm not talking too much.
Yeah.
So we put together a show in collaboration with Group Muse's Planetary Music Movement, which is a initiative of the Group Muse Foundation to uplift both the music of Black composers and performances by Black artists. We were really, really lucky to have the chance to work with N.G.O. McGreevis, Curtis Stewart, Kayla Williams, and Tapelo Masita, who I all know from Juilliard days or even before then. A really fantastic quartet playing music by Yaz Lancaster, Florence Price, and George Walker. We played that at Broadway Presbyterian, which has a really, really nice audio and video setup, and they're always here to support artists, so please check them out. They're also a really great place for, everything else. Like, they very much align with us on the social justice component. And in that show, we raised money for the artists and for a big old donation to the Bail Project. The Bail Project has been really wonderful to us as well. One of their, actually, I can't really speak too much on this yet because this isn't, an official organizational thing, but certainly a lot of members from the Bail Project have either expressed support or like directly want to get involved. So it's really great. And if you guys don't know about the Bail Project, they're a national bail fund, which of course does the work of bailing out people who can't afford to pay their own bail, but also works to organize sort of their own end. They do a lot of advocacy for the elimination of cash bail. And while Sound Off is not a lobbying group, we're not even a 501(c)(3). We're fiscally sponsored by Fractured Atlas, so we are not allowed to get involved in lobbying efforts. This is a cause that we also support. We also would like to drive ourselves out of business eventually.
It's the thing that's so obvious about all of this crime in which the way to get out of said crime is if you have enough money. It's so obvious that it's completely directed to take out the poor and keep the poor poor. Have you gotten any connections with Musicambia or the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Caucus?
Yes, I think you told me about the latter group, actually. Nathan Schramm, of course, who runs Musicambia, I meant to talk to him, and then I unfortunately haven't been able to get together on that. We've been more actually organizing specifically with organizations that advocate for the incarcerated, and around that. So organizations like the Justice Committee. Forgetting the name of the other one. There's a bunch that when you join one too many organizations, you forget all of their acronyms. Oh, RAP. Yeah, that's the big New York one that I've been really excited to be organizing with personally. Sound Off isn't allowed, I suppose, to partner publicly with groups, but I try and send people links when I can, and I think we're all sort of on the same page, like within Sound Off, and we find our ways of working individually. I think that for us has been really nice.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, how did you get involved in music? What's your story? Because everybody has a way that we found ourselves in this world, and I'm just really interested how you did.
So in Filipino culture, singing is a little bit of everything, in karaoke particularly. And so that was, I think, of some of my first introduction to music performance. And I listened to music in the womb. My mom always said, like, listening to music would calm, like, me down when I would start kicking. But in the way that you're probably asking, I grew up like in churches, lots of different kinds of churches, some Pentecostal, some not, and singing, of course, highly high level training there. I had a year of piano lessons back when I was like 7, and not even a year, probably like 6 months. And then eventually was tossed a violin back in 6th grade. I think it was sort of assumed that I would be good at it. And here in New York, we start instruments in 3rd grade. So the first violinists I think had all been playing since 3rd grade, and I was not. I was horrible. I was really bad. And I'd never been bad at something before, so I really after about like 4 months of being really sad all the time, I was like, I probably need to practice this.
It's generally the way it works.
Yeah.
So what do you mean you were assumed that you were going to be good at it? Like who assumed?
Well, the orchestra teacher assumed.
Wow.
I think that I would be good at it for obvious reasons, and I of course love her to death, and she's a wonderful human. But I think I had a reputation, to be fair, going into this school that I was like a smart kid. I'd skipped 2nd grade or whatever, and people just make assumptions. Man, I was so bad. I was beyond horrible. And by the next year, I was a bit of a monster at the instrument. I unfortunately didn't, we weren't able to afford lessons until I was in 10th grade. Somebody from the LA Phil, Long Island Philharmonic, came in because my school was one of those, it was a minority low income school. So they did a partnership with us. And, somebody from Manus Prep took an interest in me. It was like, I'll get you in here at Manus Prep if you play viola. So I played viola. I think I auditioned with 2 violin pieces, and I think they laughed, but I got in. They got me some money, so I went and started taking lessons there in 10th grade. And I realized I was really far behind, and so I panicked, and then I went over to Interlochen for full year programs for the last 2 years, and here I am now.
Yeah. David, did you have anything?
Did I have anything? I'm not. Well, we've all had our interlocking experiences, but it sounds like you went to the high school.
Yeah, I went to the camp also the summer before, and I've been a repeat visitor to the camp. I've actually, I think I'm going back this summer actually for the Viola Institute. It's very, very interesting. But I do love my teacher from there as well. I had some really interesting experiences there, but that's for another time.
Yeah. I mean, my wife and I have worked there since 2012. That's actually where Heinel and I met. I don't know if you knew that.
I think I did know that. I also met Heinel at Interlochen, I think 2018.
Yeah. Well, it's really wild because I'm actually not returning this year as a worker. I'm gonna be there as a bum living in my wife's dorm, but with the baby. But I'm not gonna be working there anymore. It's I gotta say, Interlochen was a very eye-opening experience on the difference between liberal activism and left-wing activism for me personally, because I remember we were all sitting around once talking about the horrible wages that everybody earns, and it was just this is garbage. Like, these kids pay how much money, there's how many millions of dollars of donations coming into this school, and why do we make so little? And I'm saying, like, everybody was complaining about this, and then it was like, yeah, we should do something about it. And it was like, I mean, I want to get asked back next year. It was like what? Like, you just spent like an hour and a half complaining about like wage inequality, and we just even the the hint of possibly doing some kind of collective action to get some kind of fair wages was just completely shot down by everybody at the campfire. It was a big eye opener. And yeah, I don't know. Were you there in 2018? What were you doing there? I don't remember.
So I was working as a TA for the Viola Institute, and then I was doing a non-music job actually for the summer. It was oh gosh, I can't even remember. I have like no recollection of what that job was called. I was doing like basically like event production and stuff. At times we were like working security. It was like very much not what I thought it was going to be frank. And you know, we were sort of sitting around and doing our like divisions and trying to figure out how much our hourly was. I think it came to like $3 or $4 an hour of work on the clock. You know, and of course they put you up and there is food, but it's very interesting. You know, we call this the non-profit industrial complex, but it is kind of unfortunate that a lot of these arts organizations seem to be kind of built on, you know, the literally the bodies of like rank and file people who just love the arts so much that they will do like anything for it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. There's no the makes you wonder sometimes where all that money goes. Like who's getting all the money?
Yeah, and if you look at the oh gosh, what are those called? In tax statements? Can't
Oh
quite
yeah,
remember.
their annual reports.
Yeah, their annual reports. They do end up in the black every year. So there is, of course, you know, there is the there's capability, and you know, it just seems like this is something that repeats itself at a lot of institutions. This isn't even a dig at like Interlochen specifically. You
Oh
know,
yeah, this is a capitalist
They're
culture.
it's
they're
the
doing
norm.
what everybody else is doing. Right? It's the idea that the people who are on the boards of these organizations are the people who are saying, well, this needs to be like a business. And the business that this organization does is apparently not having human beings make art. It has to be something else, right? The idea that this would be the whole point of this is to raise money so that we can pay humans to make art for us. That doesn't seem to compute in some of these conversations they seem to have, where they're just like, well, but why do we have to keep paying for this every year? It's like, well, these humans need to keep eating so that they can make art. You know, because the whole nonprofit mantra is this idea that, well, this is supposed to at some point pay for itself. It's like, since when? Since when has that ever been the case with performing arts? Ever?
Yeah, it's very strange. There's like this emphasis on like self sustaining and then only like paying like for things based on the residuals that you make, like you know,
Yep.
dividends. Like it's very peculiar. It's also it's very interesting to me. I think a lot of institutions are obsessed with this idea of like longevity, you know, in a way that's not sustaining. Like you can't repeat this forever, actually.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I hope these institutions like perhaps don't always last forever. Like, so of course there's like, you know, great interest in having an orchestra that's 300 years old, but also if what you're offering is not you know, is not needed by people after 300 years, perhaps it is time to let that model go. And also, you know, it is very interesting. I think a lot of arts organizations also pride themselves on a community, um, you know, and it makes me wonder all the time, like what a community actually is, if it's not taking care of like the most like lowly rank and file community members.
Yeah. No, it's my understanding, although this is a very cynical take, but the reason we have the podcast is so I can say my cynical takes. Um, the is that I mean they care about community. I mean the people who honestly like sit in the room and it's their job to think about how do we reach people. They care about those things, but in a certain way, they only care about the way that the measurable ways they can, because that's the thing that helps them get the grant they need to get. Right? Is how do I measure that? You know that I have this orchestra in this place, and I need to show the granting organization for the county or the state that they should still give us $1 million every year or whatever it is. The way I need to prove that is that we need to get $2 donations from 100,000 people surrounding us. So what we'll do is we'll hire a bunch of people at tiny wages to sit and call all of these people, so that they will give us $1 or so on, right? And then they come up with community programming and educational programming that is, in some sense, they're trying, but it's not very interesting, or I don't know how relevant most of it is. But it doesn't really end up tying back in some ways to the main function of the organization. And so it's, if they took the community work more seriously, it would actually be reflected in their main mission, cultural mission, of what art they actually make on a weekly or monthly basis.
Yep.
But
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, Dorian, did you have something?
Oh yeah, just I'm really thinking about what you were just saying about the longevity obsession.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, no joke. There are some organizations. Actually, it's a slightly different world, but in the veterans organizing spaces, like the anti-war military veterans places, like Veterans for Peace and About Face, Veterans Against the War. So I had gotten involved initially with Veterans for Peace, and like had read about them on Wikipedia, found their website, was like, oh, this is worth like checking out. And they do good work, but they're just so outdated and out of touch with contemporary military culture. Like they're still in like the mindset of fighting the Vietnam draft, which, noble cause in the 60s and 70s, but there hasn't been a draft since then. And
it's not going to be instituted anytime soon.
Right. And it just even just the nature of combat, the nature of the propaganda to create the war industrial machine and imperialism, it all of this shifts and everything. And so I joined About Face because it's all people of my generation who are much more aware of the internet culture, much more aware of the blatant white supremacy and fascism within the military, and 21st century form of fascism. Not the they joined the American Nazi Party, but somebody who's on 4chan and post edgy memes like that. It's a different world. And just to apply this to our space, how often are there music organizations that are so stuck on a model that was relevant 100 years ago, or or it's like barely kept up with the current era. I mean, like with Music Workers Alliance, they're addressing the need for a union or some kind of organization to support DJs and allied music workers, sound engineers, all of those sorts of things, because those sorts of laborers, because there isn't a place for them in the American Musicians Federation. And like, how fucking out of touch is that? Like, how long have DJs been working class musicians, and how I don't know. It's just like, if we look at the contemporary culture, and keep in mind, we're all three of us are classical musicians, so we obviously have a love for the music and a deep respect for the music in in some way, shape, or form. But who's gonna fill a large arena, like myself doing a contemporary improv session on the piano, or a fucking DJ? And and not that is the the line on what makes quality or what makes music meaningful or any of that, but
The
just
idea is that you both get to be in the union.
yes, exactly.
There's the no, the example I was thinking of is, so Merce Cunningham, the dancer. I mean, when he died, he had set it up so that the Merce Cunningham Dance Company would do one final tour and then end, because he didn't think that there should be his organization anymore, because the institutions of modern dance are, I mean, they slowly turn into these things where they don't really necessarily do living work anymore, right? They become a museum, and some people want their current artistic projects to become museums. I mean, Wagner did, but the if you but there's some ways in which those kinds of institutions don't serve the present. I mean, they can serve very meaningful purposes, but they don't do the kinds of things that I don't know, do have anything to do with modern problems. The example I'm thinking of is I was paying attention to, I can't remember her name, a philosopher. I was looking her up a couple of years ago, and in one of the things that got mentioned, she said that apparently in what is legal scholarship, they found that only in places that have really long, like where they don't change governments often or change constitutions regularly, do you get the kind of legalistic argument and kind of crazily over the top legalism that is our society, where we all have to question what it is that Ben Franklin or Thomas Jefferson was thinking all the time. Whereas everybody else in the world, they're just like, oh, well, our society sucks. Let's change it. And they make a new constitution or government every 10 years or something. Whereas we have this 200-year-old thing, and we're supposed to celebrate the lengthy existence of this thing. But it's one of the things that's maintaining a lot of the horrible things in our society, because we have to rely on Ruth Bader Ginsburg to save us. Oh my God, she had to save us, and she didn't save us. Oh God. Fuck her. Okay, moving on.
Subtweet Christianity in 2,000 years of the Bible.
Right.
Yeah. It is very interesting to me, because I think, time, like is sort of it's like the currency for a lot of worth in this society. And all the people that point to, like, hey, the Constitution has worked for us for 200 years. It should serve us for another 200 more. Like, no, it's like, clearly it's not working. Like, these people believed that that enslaved persons were worth 3/5 of a person, and also that indigenous Americans were not human. Like, they didn't know about viruses.
Right.
It is very, very intriguing.
It was planned without political parties.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just a different time. So sorry to say.
Yeah, it's just the whole. I mean, there are plenty of nice things about the ideas in it that could be applied forward, but there's no requirement that we have to keep this particular document in order to have the nice things that currently exist. So anyway, yeah. So it's just, like, all of this relates to the. I mean, like, part of the reason that cash bail exists is because of the way that the Constitution is organized around maintaining property as the highest value. So maintaining generational wealth as the means for the rich to stay powerful, and then letting anybody who comes into that wealth keep it. The fact that Jeff Bezos can hand billions of dollars to his ex-wife because he has to. And then now she's like one of the most richest people in the world on her own. And, rather than that money going to, I don't know, literally anyone else on the planet who might need it, it's unconscionable that we exist in a society that way. But that's reality.
Jay, what got you specifically interested? Because are you the I know you like, you're always cautious of using the wording, but are you the head of Sound Off Bale? Is that accurate?
Yeah, I'll use that one.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
self-describe as head for now. I mean I really would love to expand the governing committee a lot more. And it's been great to have a lot of like advisors through this like both personal and informal and greater people who than me who have lent their spirit to this work. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, my family has faced a lot of challenges with the twin evils of poverty and imprisonment. I've had like an uncle in jail. I've had like cousins like escaping from ice, not escaping, but always on the lookout. It is something that deeply impacts Filipino communities actually in America actually, as it is incredibly difficult for us to get visas. Very interesting because there is a whole 50-year long period where the Philippines was a colony of the U.S. Um,
Right.
I have my citizenship because my great grandfather on my dad's side, was imported according to Wikipedia's talk about the topic to work on like sugarcane farms in Hawaii. They went back and other stuff happened. My grandfather was born on U.S. territory technically. I think this was also when Hawaii was a colony. Um,
Wow.
but kind of by sheer luck, did I manage to get citizenship, and only my part of the family did. Um, this is something, of course, that I've also seen like in the communities I grew up in. The impact of absent family members lost to the prison industrial complex. You know, being on the ground over the past years at different actions, and being threatened myself with like police dogs. um, the whole of the system was it's pretty apparent to me from a quite young age. We I do credit a lot of this to social media, but I also credit a lot of it to like growing up in a predominantly black and brown neighborhood. Pretty much all my life I've lived like in a minority, like in a majority minority place. I'm so lucky to live in Harlem right now, and so there is sort of an automatic community that I think I take part in simply by where I live and who I am. But also, of course, this is something that's not addressed at all in classical music. As classical music is a predominantly white institution, even as, of course, we see more and more like East Asians like sort of taking up the mantle of like orchestra positions and like solo positions. It still remains a place of intriguing white supremacy. And it's not very shocking. Like of course the even the kinds, I hate to say that, but the kinds of like Asian demographics that are represented in classical music are ones that are moneyed, rich, like have come to this country like with like skilled worker visas versus the so-called unskilled worker visas. um it's very much a class divide and a divide of colorism as well, which I try not to think about too much because it is like it's still very painful to think about. But there's a reason that we don't see a lot of like Indian Americans and Filipino Americans in classical music. It's not that we're bad at it. It is a entirely the work of colonization and classism. And so I thought that these two uh, sort of big influences on my life. These might seem a little out there for perhaps like white people who are new to the fight, but uh, I think they're actually very deeply intertwined. Like classical music is the thing that's held up so often by neocons as like this is like the shining jewel of Western like media and culture. Like you know other people of color could never make this.
Yeah, they're full of shit when they say that. Um, But
literal Nazis, literal Nazis make that exact claim bluntly. They
right,
like, yeah,
classical music is the prestige art that lets them believe their horseshit lie about what music is. Yeah, and to make the claim that they're that they are better in some sense.
Yeah, and I think the use of it is very telling. Classical music is this kind of, it's a beautiful art. It's pretty. I do it. I do a lot of other things, but I also play classical music because it's beautiful. And this is, I think, one of the most interesting things. It's like the use of culture, of classical music as like a cultural project to further like colonialism and classism is something that I am so interested in doing a deep dive of. I've had the chance to analyze this in like some classes. Took a really awesome class at Columbia, the U.S. imperialism class led by Nefertiti Tadiar, who is or Doctor, excuse me, Dr. Tadiar, who is a Filipino scholar who's hired by Dr. Angela Davis on the UC Santa Cruz faculty, way back when Dr. Davis was the chair of that critical studies department. And there's a really wonderful book. Gosh, what's it called? Colonial Counterpoint. So interesting, and how classical music was used as a literal colonizing force. I remember actually reading about this in the Philippine Conservatory, which is now UP, University of the Philippines, Diliman, I think. There was a huge nationalistic impulse within students at the conservatory to change the language of instruction from Spanish to Tagalog, and it was just a huge thing when that happened. And that to me is so interesting. Like going back to that Engravathon project, I hope I'm not talking too much about that, but
talk
you
more.
know, looking at these some of the first kundiman, these art songs, by Nicanor Abelardo, who's like the like Filipino composer that people think of, seeing the change of text setting from Spanish to like Tagalog or even like regional languages was a little bit of like a wow, like it's kind of an eye opener. One of my buddies asked if he should offer like a Filipino translation for like one of the songs. It was Amarosa, like this foxtrot, this like weirdo form. Like what there's no such thing as a Filipino foxtrot. This is obviously imported from like Spain, in the U.S. But I was kind of like maybe we should leave it. Like I think it is very important that this stands as a historical document. You know, with if all the prestige art is in a certain language or is from a certain culture, you start to believe that a certain culture is, of course, dominant. It's like this is the culture that created so and so thing. Like it, can't do any wrong. Oh gosh, and of course I think back to that discussion we had back at CMAC about a Beethoven 5 and the drones. So fun, so exciting. But it is very much the case that classical music is the soundtrack to you know to to Western imperialism.
Yep.
You know, you can even see that in the way that it's used to sell stuff like at home. Ferrero Rochers would never be soundtracked by like Cardi B. It's it's
Right.
got to be Nutcracker or bust.
Yeah.
Um,
Right. Exactly.
it's interesting. It's a key to
Yeah.
neoliberalism is classical music, I think.
Yeah,
Right.
there's not many drone commercials by Intel using a soundtrack by Ornette Coleman or Sun Ra, or Fred Ho. Uh,
Mike, I think they'd literally like go full zombie. It would be like 28 days later they would annihilate them. Oh man. It's so interesting, of course, that like all the free jazz musicians were socialists. So fun. I love that. I love that detail.
yeah, it's I mean, Sun Ra uh, was a conscientious objector in World War I, or it may have been World War II. I mean, he was like against joining the military and to disgrace from his family. Like they were, this was joining the military was a way to possibly join the ranks of white culture, and Sun Ra had no interest in engaging in it. Um, and I mean he yeah he never really said the word socialist, but he was a socialist, just in philosophy, in the communal aspect of his music and his bands, and the way they recorded together. Sort of the intersection of vernacular music, the blues and R&B music that while also intersecting with that sort of cosmic experimental music from Saturn thing that he had going on. No joke. There's a really interesting artist named Kenyatta Hughes. Yeah, are you familiar with Kenyatta?
I know the name. No, not familiar though.
Yeah, so Kenyatta is he's a felon who went through the Musicambia program and learned how to learn music while in prison, and he's just recently been released. He has a song called Ghetto Love, which might actually be worth listening to, like on this podcast if you want to check it out. I've got it up. But he wrote a song called Ghetto Love, and at the Musicambia fundraiser, I think, with COVID, timelines are so fucked up, but I think it was a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago. But Kenyatta was there, and he performed some of his songs, and really really incredible songwriter. But specifically, Ghetto Love is just so like intense lyrically, and just so genuine, truthful. But no joke, after the concert, I happened to have with me a Sun Ra cosmic philosophy paper, and just gave it to Kenyatta, because the points Kenyatta was speaking about aligned with everything that was in this Sun Ra text. And I haven't actually caught up with him. Like, I don't know if he read it or not, but we had like a conversation about just the universalism and the internationalism and all of those aspects that Sun Ra was speaking on, and just one of the most profound things I've ever heard Sun Ra say, and that's everything Sun Ra ever said was profound. But so like to pick this one, it's like this is like a super motherfucking profound thing. But he was in a church basement in Philadelphia, and there's a video of it, and it's all these African American people just looking at Sun Ra and thinking this man is insane because he's in his like space pharaoh outfit, and he's just in this.
I love that space pharaoh outfit.
Yeah, and it's even more ridiculous because he's in a room with just a whole bunch of people not dressed that way, and they're all like, kind of like, who is this dude? And like the question comes up, and Sun Ra is just like, he's like, well, I'm not a human being. I'm a spiritual being. I don't exist on this world. And they're all like kind of laughing about it. And then he's like, why? Are you a human being? Can you vote? And like the room goes silent, and he's like, I mean, they don't treat me like a human being, so why should I try to be a human being? I'm beyond that. And it just, he's like, can you vote? Can you walk down the street of any neighborhood and be treated with dignity and respect? Well, you're not a human being, so why try to pretend that? He's like, I'm beyond that. And it is so spot the fuck on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think first of all, I think that's the cure to so much of what classical music does with its pedagogy, which is this sort of cult of the self. I mean, even the way that we venerate composers is so ridiculous, but also the fact, we're bred on competition in solitude, and and like I truly believe that the antidote to so much of the individualism that we're trained into has to be kind of a cultural deprogramming. We do need to understand that even the orchestra is not the most communal space in the world. We like
It's one of the least communal, actually having sat in them.
yeah, it's actually one of the most like dictatorial places in the world. And forms of music that ask us to practice communality. I mean, I think about like the Pauline Oliveira's like meditation. Some of those were just life changing for me to participate in. Um, we don't talk about these pieces. We think of them as kind of like oddities, but these are actually more of like what the whole world partakes in. This is like the music of our world is generally communal in practice, generally for a feeling as opposed to like in execution. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
There's just these directions, that are kind of calling. I think the sonic meditations, they sort of call you into a different space. And I think I'm gonna make. I hope this doesn't offend anybody listening, but I do very much trace a line between like Afrofuturism and that the sort of sense of like there is an other that we can reach to. And specifically Sun Ra's work. That's also really funny. I saw the Sun Ra Orchestra back in like 2017 because they were opening for Solange of all people.
wow.
It makes a lot of sense, but it was like what I didn't expect to see like Sun Ra Orchestra when I was waiting to see Solange at Radio City. That's a thing that I was like I didn't think that they would survive after I wasn't aware that they would be in existence after Sun Ra passed. I was born in 1997, so I never saw Sun Ra live even as a child. But there's so much connection. Sorry, I was went off on a little tangent. There's so much connection, I think, between these between Afrofuturism and sort of all of these like people would describe them as escapist to like movements to like the ballroom scene in New York. How oppressed LGBTQ like brown and black people would a lot of them homeless or like a lot of sex workers, a lot of like very low paid workers would go out and like create their own sort of opulence at these sorts of functions, which when I think of Sun Ra, I kind of look at it, I'm like, this is a little bit like drag. You're putting on a costume, you're becoming something else. It's like that epic transformation, and the fact that through transformation, it's not sort of like this Wagnerian like transformation into like the past and like you can't access it. It's actually a transformation that's deeply accessible if you just free your mind, open yourself to these possibilities. um Think about that like all the time, because of course I run into everything that you're talking about, like Dorian, when you briefly going back to interlocking, when anything is suggested, that immediate pushback is not because people hate you. It does not come from a place of hate. It just comes from a place of perhaps not seeing. When we have to hyper focus on the present, when we're like hand to mouth for money, for food and for like our lives, we don't have the possibility oftentimes of seeing beyond. It's like foreclosed on us because we literally do not have the space to. I don't think it's kind of a mistake that, to be frank, a lot of the leaders in, at the forefronts of these movements, sound off, I guess I don't want to call it a movement, but being among like these, like I have time and money like I've never had, being like a fellow with an orchestra. I have a lot of time to just sit and think, even as much as I teach 30 hours a week. But I when I was a teenager at MSM, like doing God knows what for money, like I would have never had the ability to think like this, because I literally was thinking about how I was going to get my next meal. And this is how creativity is I think foreclosed on artists in particular, but anybody on the street could be a great thinker if they had the
Mhm.
opportunity, and they had the time and the space to.
Well, and there's also the propaganda model put out of the pick yourself up from your bootstraps artist story, the rags to riches, like, oh, Jay-Z was a crack dealer and now he's one of the most successful hip hop artists, you can do that too. um, when in reality there is a 6% chance of ever changing classes. It's yeah, like if the class you are born into, there is a 6% chance that you might go one or the other. um, and and just the amount of times we hear the story of like the artist who had so little that they had to innovate, blah 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 blah, and now they're so and so. It's such a rarity, when the reality is that if people had their basic needs met and had access to time, and like healthy time, creativity would just be a part of the culture. um, I mean, there's a Steve Coleman article I read a few years ago where he talks about the difference with like when he went to a village in Africa to study percussion. He talked about how the class division was gone. There is a master drummer. Like there's the drummer who understands the tradition in the deepest sense. But when the community is making music together, a child can participate, and will participate, and is encouraged to participate. Whereas in our culture, uh, this culture, the white supremacist culture, um, you don't have that same thing. There's a division just even between the audience and the performer. Um, it,
People in our society think they shouldn't sing
mm-hmm. Well,
like all the time.
and it seeps into so many places that even things like would any child be culturally allowed to enter the stage with John Coltrane, or to enter the space for the New York Philharmonic, or I mean even in like punk shows or hip hop shows, there's still a divide. um and it's just how much the white supremacist culture bleeds into all of these aspects.
There's a reason they call it breaking the fourth wall. There's no wall, but we imagine one all the time. It's a very important for us to maintain to maintain that sort of separation that you're describing, right?
Yeah, it's very much a European aesthetic. I mean, of course, where it comes from is literally from like class divisions. What the origins of plays. Who were the actors and who were the audience members. Concerts. The idea of a concert doesn't exist in a lot of other cultures inherently.
Right.
There's just music. Music is a cultural thing. You just do it, and oftentimes every night.
Yeah. No, it's
Very,
right.
very interesting.
That's a good
There's
point.
a lot of great scholarship on, particularly from Black musicologists, on aesthetics of Black music, of the African diaspora, and not to make it all one thing, but Eileen Southern, for example, that amazing book, very much details out like what she sees as the aesthetics of culture, of the musical practices that were valued. Chief among them, I think, is this involvement of the audience. That this lack of clear demarcation between audience and performer. It it we and that to me is so interesting because when we question that, we actually question so much in the way that we produce art. I think it's always so important that we understand like every aesthetic that we have is created. It was created at a certain point in time. Everything, you know, has sort of a birth time, and maybe, you know, some of these need death times, or at least we can move away from them to some degree. I'm not saying that, you know, every, you know, Western like music will be improved with like people getting on stage and jamming out. I do understand that as a museum piece, you know, it is interesting to have performances of Baroque music. Like, you know, we have people like doing Baroque steps. I always find it so funny to watch like Baroque reenactments of like certain dances, and then there'll be like a disclaimer, like, we don't actually know how this dance went. We're going entirely by the way it's like listed in the book, like of some book of dance steps, because of course these practices have not been passed down through the generations. You know, I think stuff like that is so interesting because that sort of proves true the idea that, you know, we kind of artificially are creating um, a permanency for some things. You know, we're
Right.
acting like this stuff is always going to be here. It doesn't have to be, and maybe it won't. You know, and that's fine. I don't. You know, there's
Which
always going to
the
be documents. Sorry,
No,
you
you're
want to go?
good. No. So the to add on to your point, it's that we have this idea about perfection, and that this music is somehow perfect in some sense, and that the way that we strive toward that perfection is through constant recreation of the same things over and over again, not realizing that this music also can, if we're not paying attention, recreate all of the social things that were going on that made that created that thing. I mean, so orchestras are literally, it's a servant class of people who are there to entertain the rich, and that's what Baroque music is generally for, a lot of it. You know, so the idea that, you know, if we have an idea that we want to have different social relations, is there a way to perform Baroque music so that we're not recreating those other social relations? I don't actually know.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. You know, who owned these orchestras? They were landowners who is on the boards of every orchestra, like real estate moguls,
Right.
you know. And it's, I mean, it's really, it's very nice to think that like at the end of the day, like maybe you'll have like an orchestra job, and you know all your problems will be solved when you're making like $50,000 a year or $60,000 a year, or you know at the most $150,000 a year. Like wow, that would be grand. But we do see, of course, that when people are upset, they can just take that money away. We see the Met has been out of work for what, a year now?
Right.
Yep.
A year now?
Mhm.
Not no pay.
And they got all furloughed, and a lot of people have to move out of the city because they couldn't afford to keep their living space, as I understand.
Yeah, so very fun. I mean, one of their concert masters is now doing stuff in Germany, I think, which is, you know, great. So wonderful. But I think as artists, oftentimes feel that at the very least, these sources of income, like this kind of profession, if we play our cards right, will at least give us a degree of stability.
Yeah,
And
but it's
the
really just noblesse oblige from the rich.
Yeah, it's very illusory. I mean, even if that didn't happen, how often do orchestras fold because I mean, because one person pulls out, you know?
Right. The
And I have to
Baltimore Symphony is like a perfect example of something like that. Just the kind of just disappearance out of nowhere.
and it's so interesting that even when orchestras are at like 40 or 50% capacity, they won't necessarily close. A lot of orchestras run like that. I mean,
Right.
I
Well,
don't know how
that's
many times. Yeah, I don't know how many times I've gone to the New York Phil and it's been like, you know, one third, like half. But because the donor, uh, you know, the donors at the top have not decided to pull out, they can still keep going. But if they're pulling in full halls, and then if like a major donor pulled out, it would be catastrophic. It's so interesting that like although they're purported to be like community serving organizations, they are still not. You
no,
know,
right.
it's sort of like the, you know, of course we've transitioned from like, you know, get like the Baroque period to the modern era, but the actual like organization of these institutions has like done lateral movement. They're still being propped up by rich people, but now of course you're allowed to come in for a large sum if you are of a different class.
Right.
It's just it's not for you. You are just a visitor in the space essentially.
Right. Oh, it's it's, I mean, like if you go look at those annual reports of these organizations, I mean, how much money is actually generated from ticket sales, like the people that are actually supposedly the reason to show up, the reason to their concerts. I mean, it's not even half. I mean, it's all from foundations and donor money. And so so in Cleveland, where I live, luckily, the rich people in this city decided that they really want the Cleveland Orchestra to exist. So apparently enough people are giving money that everybody in the Cleveland Orchestra is getting paid. It's reduced, but they're still getting paid, and they still get all their wonderful benefits. I mean, they're one of the highest paid orchestras in the country, but they also still getting paid. But I mean, but we just had to rely on the fact that the people around here decided that they wanted this thing that much, rather than like the people of Cleveland in some sort of large grand scalar way that would be in some sort of socialist idea would say this particular thing is so meaningful to us as a large scale community that this is something we want to protect these people coming through, right? But that didn't happen in a lot of other places.
There's also the symbology of where these orchestra halls are located. They're often really towers of gentrification.
Yep.
You know, how many times do you go see an orchestra, but then, you know, on your way to the car, it's like, ooh, like this neighborhood, I don't know about this. And I mean, it's literally it's like a symbol of colonialism, or you know, a symbol of imperialism.
Right. Well, the Severance Hall in Cleveland was purposely built outside of the main downtown city center as to avoid the large glut of people they didn't want to be seen around at the time. Well, guess what? In the way that everything changed in the course of history, now University Circle, where that is, I mean, you can go to 10 blocks in a direction away from that, and you're in a very low income area. I mean, so it's, you know, the way that everything changed, it meant that it happened to them anyway. But, you know, there's still this, but it's still kind of like a, you know, they want to be open and available. That's the marketing. Luckily, the rich people in Cleveland let the Cleveland Art Museum be free forever, so anybody can walk in. But again, that was noblesse oblige. It's not like, you know, Bill Gates gets to decide that all his money goes toward malaria or climate change. Imagine if a group of people were able to put together their money for the things that, you know, do we need malaria nets? Damn right. Do we need stuff happen for climate change? Sure. Should Bill Gates get to be the person that decides those happen? No. On his own.
Hey, Jay,
right.
I know you had said you wanted to get coffee before your next commitment. Did we want to maybe wrap it up here?
Yeah, do you have any other questions? Oh, I hear Ildiko going from my left headphone to my right headphone. That is so interesting.
Yeah. No, Ildi is.
What is that? Is she sleeping, or am I hearing something else?
Oh, that's a tea kettle right
now.
now.
Oh shit! I was like, it certainly sounded like a baby's voice for a moment.
Yeah, I mean it very well could have, because there is a baby on the other side of this computer right now.
Oh.
Yeah. That's been a fascinating experience, just watching the baby grow and process information and figure things out for the first time. You know, she's actually we're starting to develop good improvisational language at the piano. It's become a therapeutic place.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah. Well, like, yeah, I haven't even posted some of the legitimately hip like improvs that we've been doing lately. Like, because it used to be like, I play, and then she plays, and then I play, and then she plays, and now it's starting to turn into like, we're gonna play together. All right, we're gonna give some space. We're gonna, it's super super dope. Um, and yeah, I mean, we were right before we started recording, we were talking about just generational awareness of the West's cultural existential denialism, and how Jay, you're from a generation, you're from the next generation that from what David and I are in, and you were saying how there seems to be a more awareness of mortality, and that's one thing I keep thinking about Ildiko and generation that she's going to be experiencing, because it's going to be even more detrimental to it's going to be way closer, and yeah, it's a scary thought, but it's also like, yeah, it's one of those thoughts that you just have of like, what world is this person coming into? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what generation is she gonna be? Like Gen ZZ, double Z, double A? I don't know how it rolls around.
Yeah, I mean the
generation who did something about it.
Oh, hopefully. Well, I mean, it's just very interesting. I have very many memories of like going back in like science textbooks when I was younger. Maybe I'm alone in this, but I don't think I am. And like literally reading about like, hey, global warming will like make the Earth inhabitable by 2050 if we keep doing this. And it was just there, and it was just there. And this was sort of what we were bombarded with, and of course you kind of pay it no mind as a kid, because you're like, well, that's how many years now, like, well, guess what, it's 2020 and we're seeing what happened. It's not like any of us are like Cassandra. It's literally that we've been told information that ended up being true. And of course a lot of us are in locations where climate change is very apparent. I mean, I think about like Long Island, think about the Philippines all the time, and the Midwest, California, Florida. I mean, every place is getting mauled by climate change, but some people are happier to sort of like leave it up to like, well, it's hot weather today, versus like, oh, it's been hot weather today for like 50 days in a row. Also, like, my lawn is on fire. It's a little bit common sense, but also I think, frankly, we did have a reasonable education on the effects of climate change growing up, and that that I think perhaps wasn't available to a lot of people from earlier generations. So the information is literally like just dispersal of that information, because it's not like it was not knowledge, or it's not like it wasn't known, but it seemed, I think, probably in like the 50s or 60s, like when people were growing up, that it was just a few scientists saying that, and besides, like, the coal lobby and the oil lobby and tobacco lobby were all like battling it out. But
yeah,
I'm very happy that with of course the internet, like, people seem to be able to occasionally pick the forest from the trees. And of course there are so many other issues with the internet, but I think useful among them, at least, is the very real awareness that if we don't do something about literally everything, then we are actually looking at a possibly apocalyptic timeline.
Yeah.
I mean, no joke. I grew up in a household where anecdotal evidence was said, where most scientists don't even believe in climate change. Well, global warming. It wasn't even climate change. It was global warming. Yeah. And I mean, that was just something that was just said.
Well, we're all supposed to recycle.
Right. Well, recycling doesn't even do anything. That, like, this is literally what I was raised in, this kind of a household, and like, to the point where I now question, it's like, where the fuck was that information coming from? This weird anecdotal stuff, and I mean, I know where it was coming from. It was coming from Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, but yeah. So I guess let's to close out here. Jay, where can people find you or find out information about Sound Off?
I have a website. It's jhulio.com, but I think there are possibly more worthwhile websites to be on. You can also find me at j.julio on Instagram. Please do not add me on Facebook. Sound Off, though, is what I'm most interested in pumping. So you can find Sound Off Music for Bail on Facebook at Sound Off Music for Bail. On Instagram, we are soundoff.musicforbail, and our website is musicforbail.com. So there's a running theme of different collections of dots and missing words. You can also find us on a ton of concert websites. Group Muse has a lot of our shows. We also partner with other organizations, and you just Google us and stuff will come up. We do things, so we have a presence.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming on and shooting the shit with us. I find the work you do just to be incredibly powerful and incredibly important. And it is just last comment on my end. The point you brought up about people seeing the connection between classical music and the prison industrial complex, and it's like the fact of the matter is that we're all human beings and we're all working with what we can offer, and it doesn't even seem strange to me that somebody who has a deep connection to classical music but also understands the world that you're witnessing would merge those together to create a better world. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, Jay. I really appreciate you being on today.
Of course. Thank you, Dorian. Thank you, David, for having me on. And look forward to hearing this in the future.
Yeah, us too. All right. Well, this has been Trysteropod. Rock and roll. Catch y'all later.
Okay. You're listening to Start again.